So good evening from a rather grey and rainy Aberdeenshire. My name is Alice Butler-Walk, and I just want to thank you for joining the final Community Seminar Series talk of 2020. It's been an interesting year on many levels, but the strange silver lining of all that's happened is that we are now able to welcome so many people to our seminars since going digital. It's a tenuous silver lining. A couple of virtual housekeeping points though before we start. In order to keep everything secure and hopefully free from technical glitches, I'm going to ask that microphones are kept off. And if you have questions for our speaker, that you pop them in the chat box and I can put them forward at the end. I won't read your name with the question, so you can be sure that you'll remain anonymous. And just to make you aware, the event will be recorded and will be listed on YouTube in the coming weeks. And that's it, really. I think we can get started. So I'm really pleased to welcome Dr. Ted Gutsche from Lancaster University. Formerly a journalist, Ted is now a senior lecturer in critical digital media practice, and his work considers the application of critical cultural theory to investigate issues of power in journalism. We're thrilled to have Ted talk with us this evening on the very topical issue of fake news. So thank you, Ted.
Hi, thanks, Alice. Thanks, everybody, for being here tonight. It's very nice to be able to do this. And just a word of caution: my 3-year-old's bedtime will be occurring possibly at some point. So if there's a little bit of ruckus while we were all 3 years old and not wanting to take a bath at some point. So I am going to share my screen here just so that you can have something other than just my face. And I'm wondering that just to make sure that I'm doing this correctly again. Let's see. Alice, can you confirm that that is correct?
That is correct.
Okay, thanks. So what I wanted to talk a little bit about tonight is not just what fake news is or may be, but really how we can start to think philosophically differently about journalism and about the news and information that's presented to us, from BBC to the New York Times to our local newspapers and radio stations and whatnot. This is prettier than my about me slide. So I'll just start a second by saying a little bit about my background. So I started in journalism when I was about 16 and working for a local paper, which sadly now I just learned a month or so ago has closed due to economic challenges and also a thriving battle for internet space and place in the United States and elsewhere. And so they kind of lost that battle after a few hundred years. But I've been doing that. I've been in journalism then all my life, teaching it now, but started some online nonprofit news organizations in the US, have dabbled with VR journalism. When I was in Miami for 5 or 6 years, working on some global warming, climate change, sea level rise journalism and stuff down there. But I have a very complicated relationship with journalism. It's something I love. I love writing. I love telling stories. I love producing. Just, as we were preparing for this, I was finishing up some edits to a podcast I do about journalism, which I'll plug later. But so I really love having my hands kind of in that, but I've also been very concerned about the ideological and some would say maybe philosophical aspects of journalism. And I think, at the rise of Donald Trump, and I'm sorry for being so ethnocentric, most of my work does focus on the US, even though fake news and these issues certainly are global, and we know that. But I've been troubled in part most recently because there's discussion about this being, fake news being a new thing, or mis and disinformation being something that is now just starting to cause complications for society. And certainly today's fake news situation is different in the sense that it's spread faster and wider and shared and maybe challenged, but also probably reinforced by our own belief systems and experiences and bubbles of people we talk to. But this image here, which I'll come back to, is a representation of some earlier fake news in the US. And so I want to just kind of go and just do a quick sort of not everything is new, or maybe there's no such thing as new ideas sort of section of this by talking about this image and what this represents. But also talking about then how can we think differently about the news, and then at the very end going through some tools that we can actually use. Some might be quite simple for folks, such as a reverse Google image search, right? But then as we kind of progress throughout the tools that we have access to online, they get much more complicated. This is not a tech heavy talk. I'm not expecting anybody to walk away with tech skills. I don't even have all of them, but it is a way to just kind of share that. And I think Alice, I sent earlier to her a PDF of some of the sources and resources that I'll be talking about tonight, in addition to the URLs of the tools that I'll be talking about. And I'll leave it to Alice if she wants to share that, or how she may share that with you. But you can also get in touch with me. My website's on here, and you can just certainly contact me, but it would be nice for you to have kind of those resources. So that was the about me, but see, that's just not a very pretty slide, is it? So I kind of wanted to start with a quiz. This is a capturing from Twitter. Russia will attack the United States with missiles. And it's coming from at NYT video Twitter account. Is this something, do you think that that was real? Was this a real tweet that was sent out? Alice, I don't know if you can, if anybody can just say yes or no if we can get a sense of.
Yeah. If people just want to pop their thoughts in the chat, yeah.
So this is an example that was provided by the Globe and Mail in Canada, kind of its own digital sort of fake news quiz. So this is actually fake. I wonder if I can see the chat if I click here and then I break the system. Then everything falls apart. No, I think I can do it. Yep. So it is. Yeah, I love the one from Tim. No question mark. Very, very good. Yeah. So of course this is fake. According to the Globe and Mail, just because that's what I'm kind of reading off my other screen here, is that yes, this was posted through at NYT Video, which is a real New York Times account. But the account had been well, I'll just read. So if Russia were really planning to attack the United States with missiles, why would the New York Times break that story on their video Twitter account and not the main one? So one of the things that they're trying to get to is, how do we know if something's really true, is going and asking the source. And that may be simpler than not. But it also says there's some deeper things that you could understand about certainly how people tweet and how news organizations tweet. Certainly this says the New York Times tweets are typically written in full sentences, but this particular tweet is more of a phrase. It doesn't end with a period. They often use things like breaking news and other hashtags. And the reason they say this looks so strange is because hackers wrote it. They hijacked the account and they sent it out. The Times deleted these tweets and others. So in some degree, it was a real tweet. I mean, it existed and it certainly came from a legitimate account. But is this really the fake news that we're talking about? And I think that's one of the things we want to talk about is when we're talking about what's fake, is it an event that didn't really happen, or is it ideologically biased or untrue even, or purposefully mis or disinformation that's being shared by potentially a legitimate source? So that's kind of the complication that we want to look at. But this here is from the 1830s in New York. This is some early fake news. This is the Great Moon Hoax, where news organizations in New York were kind of going through this penny press fight for capital, for market share, for legitimacy and authority among audiences. And this is a fictional account that was presented as real. the articles that went throughout a series in the Sun talked about bison, goats, unicorns, beavers, and bat-like winged humanoids that were living on the moon, and that this Dr. Andrew Grant had somehow created a telescope that could see these creatures. And there's debate about the degree to which people initially believed this to be true or not. And we can go also to War of the Worlds radio broadcasts as another example that actually led to some significant individual and social strife when people were believing that the world was being attacked by aliens. But this example of early fake news shows how news organizations have long fought for not just subscribers and attention, but fought to appear legitimate and authoritative. And that audiences, despite our concerns about whether we really believe the BBC or if we like one newspaper over another, or if we read the tabloids or we don't, that this sort of storytelling still had people talking about the Sun anyway as being a real news mover and shaker in the world, and something that should be recognized as being authoritative. So this new fake news moment isn't just related to Donald Trump. It may look a little bit different now than before, but we've had Mark Twain as a journalist and also as a literary figure who stretched truth, right? And we've had Jacob Riis, who was a Dutch photojournalist who went in and is still prized as an amazing photojournalist in the early days of U.S. newspapering, but also started to kind of set up some scenes, right? I mean, one of the main things that we should understand about news anyway is that it's not organic. It doesn't grow on a tree, right? Where the journalist wakes up in the morning and she goes out and says, I'm going to pick this apple, or I'm going to pick this news piece and explore it. It's a social construction, right? And it's based on a lot of expectations of audience, but also marketplace and the journalists themselves. Now, this is an image from Claire Wardle in 2017, who put together these typifications of mis and disinformation. So the fake news conversation quickly moved into one about information, and information isn't free of culture. I mean, it's how it's shaped, it's molded by institutions and individuals and interpretation. So when we receive a bit of information, again, that's not just like a leaf fell from the tree naturally as it started to age and it fell in the wind, right? The information has been molded and shaped in not just through language, but through meaning. And so in the 7 types of mis and disinformation, I won't go through all of these here, but there's a spectrum. And what we started to talk about was, on one side, something that might be satire or parody, right? And another side, which is manipulated content. So that would be the top left being satire parody and the bottom right being the manipulated content. And what Wardle and Tandock and others have done is talk about the intentionality behind the creation of this content as being a way to determine where mis and disinformation, or quote unquote fake news, if that's kind of the writ large sort of language we're using about it, it fits, right? What's the intentionality behind the producer? Is it in the fiction of bat people, which what was the intention there? Was it to entertain, make money, or are we talking about deep fakes, which I'll show an example of, where we have people's heads being replaced with other people's heads and voices being manipulated to say certain things that they haven't said, or, as we'll show, even Western governments that think that they're somehow above a reproach and somehow more quote unquote democratic than another, still creating and manipulating content that it shares with press. So that's where that conversation moved pretty quickly from fake news, right, to dis and misinformation. So it's kind of important to think about the intentionality perhaps behind what's going on. So the example about the tweet and Russia attacking, the United States with missiles, and then hacking into the New York Times account to set that out. What was the intention? Was it just to have fun, or was it to push some sort of agenda in terms of how voters might behave in an election, or how politicians might respond to a geopolitical situation that already was a bit convoluted? So this, for instance, is an example of what we might think about as being less dangerous fake news, I guess, if that's not one of those categories. But this is an article: South End residents evacuate town over supermoon collision fears, that this big moon was going to come and crash and kill everybody. We're always so afraid of dying, aren't we? And so this is an example of people who just like to make things up, right? But also it's an example of that people like to believe things, right? People like to, I mean, I was just this morning with my family having a conversation being directed my direction that, COVID is still a hoax, right? And it's like, I mean, how are we still having this conversation? But that's what, members of my extended family happen to believe. So if they were to go someplace that is suggesting that it's just made up, that reinforces what they may already think, and that connects to lots of other ideological positions that they probably have, not related to COVID, but to governance and to other ideas, right? So the citation for this comes from the BBC. They did a story on this, and they contacted this person who was posting on Facebook, chief reporter, you can see the byline here, and said, what is this? Why are you writing these stories that didn't really even happen? And he says that he just has fun doing this. He says that his stories and his Facebook page and the spread that he got from it ended up with up to 2 million views per month, right? So you're making, maybe making some money off of this, but you're also getting some attention. And this chief reporter here, half the people fall. Alice, was that for me, or was that just?
Apologies, it was an unintended comment.
No worries. That's usually how my wife gets my attention, actually. Half the people fall for the stories, he told the paper, and the other half are generally entertained by what they see. But if people read these things, and there are people in this household that I'm in who just tend to read the headline, don't seem to read further, and then I get told some amazing story that was either a clickbait story, to draw on attention, or another type of clickbait story that just was underselling, oversold what the story was, and the story was not nearly as accurate as the headline led us to believe. Here's another example of a fake story. This is eagle baby attack. Montreal toddler seemingly snatched by golden eagle. And when you click on the video, you actually see this eagle come in and pick up this toddler, or try to pick up this toddler, and it kind of drops the kid, and the bird kind of flies away. Now, this was an early 2012 sort of example of perhaps fake news. This got spread on not just Huffington Post, which is which somehow has become a legitimate news organization, but elsewhere. And this got great spread about this video. But actually, the Huffington Post article started, "Eagles are majestic animals, but would they ever go after a baby? One Montreal child got a real close call when a bird thought to be a golden eagle swooped down and almost carried the baby away." But this actually was a fake video made by animation students at an animation school, right? And this was one of the early stages where people were starting to ask, how and why are we spreading this content? And there were actual questions about its validity when it first came out, because some people who know how to do videography and animation thought that it looked a little suspect. But also maybe this is an example of how journalists like free stuff. I mean, there's a reason why journalism buildings, for as long as they've existed, have been around centers of information control. It's not unusual for newsrooms to be next to courthouses, right? Because that's free news. You just send the reporter over to the cop shop or into the courtroom, and you get a story for the next day. When I was a reporter, I would be sent to the courthouse to look through files. pending cases to see which ones we wanted to go to. Same thing with the police department. You look through and you'd see what reports that they had written up, and you just pick which ones you want, and you write the story. You don't really need to do much other than asking the police officers to verify the information, right, that's in the report, or clarify things. And this was kind of an example of how journalists are susceptible to disinformation or fake news, and amplifying that, in part because the business model relies on freeness, right, on free news. And some of this we want to believe, right? We want to go to the coffee shop or get in the car with someone and say, "Oh my gosh, did you just see this thing?" Right? So that's one of the things, is that we're just kind of susceptible in journalism to that. So I don't want to start the video. This might actually start the video. No, don't start the video. Let's go here. So, but really, today's fake news conversation centers a lot around these two images. On the left, you see one of Barack Obama's inaugural events in Washington, D.C. on the Mall. And on the right, you see Donald Trump's. And so this was when Donald Trump was trying to argue that he had more people at his inauguration than Barack Obama. Now, this wasn't the first time that we had candidates or new presidents either lying or misinterpreting or stretching the truth. I mean, this isn't the first time. I mean, Donald Trump may be some things, but he's not unique in that respect. But these visuals became something where people are like, well, these are official video, these are official images and videos of this event. What are you talking about? Clearly one has more people than the other. But what really kind of confused us and got us talking with some new language about issues of truth and fake news, and if there is such a thing as real news, and we can talk about that later, is this idea of alternative facts, right? So Kellyanne Conway was kind of an in and out, always around Trump advisor, who told journalists that yes, we had more people there, and these are alternative facts, right? So alternative facts, both being that there were more people, but certainly an ideological position counter to mainstream media that was pretty clearly saying no. I mean, the evidence stands on its own. Now, this is from an article that I found to be really interesting, and if there are any solicitors or lawyers on here, they probably know a heck of a lot more about this type of language than I do. But in the article, they talked about how Kellyanne Conway was maybe misusing or misappropriating or stretching the meanings behind the term alternative fact. That was an invocation, they write, of legal terminology, which is Kellyanne's attempt to derail mounting criticism by having claims that one conversation could stand in evidence to another. And so in legal terms, that there are facts and alternative facts that the legal process has people work through, but they begin as legitimate, so that there's a moment of tension where that process can move forward, right? And so Kellyanne Conway wanted to come forward and say, well, we just here's our interpretation, and we want that to be as legitimate as other people, right? As the other side, right? And so they write that Kellyanne Conway herself seems indifferent as to whether this conceptual transfer from a legal sphere to more of a secular sphere produces a claim that's true or false. She only cares about the outcome, namely that people accept the assertion that they're making. And so this alternative facts thing really started to confuse a lot of us, not just about that particular moment where there was a great long debate, which probably went longer than it needed to, about those particular images, but it was starting to set a tone as to what the Trump administration and what that presidency and the press interactions with the presidency, which is, again, more of an institution than it is an actual individual, right? What that was going to be like. And I have to say, I'm not making a political statement, because God forbid someone do that, but life sure has been a little bit easier, not having to every single day follow the news and wonder what crazy thing is happening next. And I don't know if that's actually good or bad, because I think when we were actually having conversations about truth, we were starting to unveil some of the intricacies of how journalism works and how political rhetoric works. And now I think as it looks like we're going into more of a quote unquote normal presidency, we're all just, those of us who look at this are all kind of exhausted, but also are looking for some sort of reinforcement that everything's going to be okay, when really that's just kind of adding that veil back as to how the press and the president, or the press and politics or business or whatever, operate together. But that's maybe another conversation. So when we started to complicate fake news, when we started to complicate issues of truth, starting with alternative facts and whatnot, we started to kind of unpack this and find different categories and avenues and areas where mis and disinformation in particular were emerging. And so one idea that these authors write about here is viral sloganing, right? So this is an example of a movement of "it's okay to be white," which is many would argue is a racist sort of white supremacy kind of movement, where we are trying to counter the Black Lives Movement and whatnot. And so it's the use of short slogans and visuals like this, and memes and other things that are amplified through press coverage about them, right? So if there's a movement going on, and this isn't necessarily new either, right? But if there's a movement surrounding images like this or slogans, right? Like this says, these are instructions for how to be part of the "It's Okay to Be White" movement that went on 4chan, Stormfront, and Reddit, and also got press coverage because it was something that was happening, and journalists somehow find that if something's happening, they need to be legitimate enough to talk about it for some reason. But there's the viral sloganing, right, in one way that's making the movement, but then it's the press amplification. And so a lot of people have been concerned in writing about amplification of ideological positions related to determinations on truth or facts in the news for the last few years. And that's not just, of course, in the United States context, but is in a lot of the globe where populism continues to spread. And so we found also some other categories of leak forgery, for instance. Now, leaks are fascinating, and journalists can't work without leaks, where accidentally, right, a press release or an internal document or memo about some political firestorm or a business decision or something like that gets leaked out into the press, and then the journalist who gets to cover the leak, goes up a few notches in her career because she was the one to expose this leak. I mean, everybody wants to have kind of a Watergate moment in their career as a journalist, and so leaks are a way not just to actually influence policy, because they're intentionally sent out by organizations to affect business, economy, social situations, political environments, policy changes, but it's a way for media to win attention. What we're seeing, though, is that some of these leaks are being forged. So people will forge press releases, or people will forge internal memos and send them out. Again, because the motivation, the intent, right, goes anywhere from because it'd be funny to watch people shaking their boots, but also to the idea of we're actually going to undermine a system, or we're going to undermine a business transaction or a politician, right? Keyword squatting is another one, where social media accounts and terms are used to capture and direct traffic. So it's almost an SEO on steroids, where we're funneling people away from particular maybe mainstream or verifiable sources or news organizations to alternative explanations, right, or to other websites. And again, this isn't much new either. I mean, activists have long used hashtags and campaigns and I guess SEO, right? Using social media to funnel their own positions one way or the other to either mainstream it or to connect it to a more of a radical position. Evidence collaging. So this goes back to Pizzagate, as I just said, Watergate, right? Here's Pizzagate. This is where Democrats were accused in the United States, particularly the Clinton White House crew, of being pedophiles and sex traffickers and all these child sex ring collusion folk. And it led to police actually raiding a pizza shop in Washington, D.C. And finding these other documents. So one of these WikiLeaks documents on the left-hand side is it appears to be like an email from John Podesta, where people were saying that these words, such as on the right here, hot dog equaled boy, or words like pasta equaled little boy, or other things that you can see here, and that the collaging, the bringing together of these different images, forged documents or interpretations of documents, arranged in a way that make it very easily liked or shared, spread throughout social media, is a way to influence people's perceptions and understandings on things, right? And but again, there's an underlying ideological movement that's going on here about where people are politically, ideologically, in a faith-based or spiritual or religious context, or other forms of identity. And so there's a manipulation, again, with this intentionality to move towards seeing a particular outcome, not just because it's fun to do, but there's some intentionality here to undermine or delegitimize institutions, which I'm all for delegitimizing institutions, but I think that there are different rationales and reasons for actually that intentionality. So this here is an image of a video of a deep fake. And this is where comedian Jordan Peele in BuzzFeed used AI to make Obama say a lot of things that he didn't say. So he called Donald Trump, for instance, a total and complete dipshit, and had Barack Obama here saying, it may sound basic, but how we move forward in the age of information is going to be the difference between whether we survive or whether we become some kind of effed up dystopia. So using language, perhaps, or even ideas that maybe Barack Obama has or doesn't have, I'm really not that sure, to have him say these things. And the point was that this sort of ability to do these things is becoming very easy for consumers. So Photoshop, for instance, has been working on another program, Adobe, to create deep fakes. Now, they may not call them deep fakes, they may call them alterations or new videos or something else, right? And that's becoming very, very concerning, because then it leaves journalists having to figure out, well, what the heck is this thing? Is this real or not? And if this were a real video, would Barack Obama actually admit to it? And so this was an early concern in 2018 about the role of deep fakes. But what's really I'm going to try and skip this video here too, but what's the real problem here? We have all of these different movements. We have new and old issues related to fake news, and we have the longstanding ideological challenges of societies and journalism to either propagate, to problematize, to challenge these positions. So what do I think the concerns are here? Well, I think sometimes we have to think that the news is sometimes too hard not to believe. And it's not just about the eagle picking up a kid, right? Which may or may not be able to happen. And I'm sure there are folk here who could tell us if that were actually the case. And so, but it's also about wanting to believe either the best in people in the world or the worst in people in the world. And that moves us as consumers, as citizens, as educators, as students, as parents, right, and as children. And so this, sometimes we just want to believe certain things happening. Like there was this, when I was in PhD school, a story about a young boy that had been carried off in a homemade weather balloon sort of thing, right? And I guess they called him Balloon Boy. And really, it was a hoax. It was a hoax by the parent who wanted to get some attention for an invention that he was trying to create, and so on and so forth. But the journalists just rallied around this to 24-hour sort of coverage of that, to live feeds from their front yard, to scientists and experts coming on to talk about this, the meteorology and all this sort of stuff, and weather patterns, and how high could the kid go before he dies. And so, we just come to these things because we want to believe the fantastic for lots of reasons. And sometimes facts just aren't to be believed. We still have people who, for some reason, believe we haven't gone to the moon. I guess I've never been to the moon, so I can't actually tell you for sure that that's what's happened, but I tend to trust the sources that are telling me those things, and I trust what I'm seeing and the people I've talked to, right? Just even in everyday life. But sometimes facts just aren't to be believed. I think when we hear the image and the video of the Hindenburg, right, exploding, and people say, oh, the humanity, you almost can't believe what you're seeing in front of your face. Some people couldn't believe that Donald Trump actually got elected, and certainly Donald Trump can't believe that Joe Biden got elected. So some facts just are not to be believed. And sometimes things are just what we would call BS. Some things that aren't even based in fact, that we just kind of don't even recognize that there are truths to things. And so we'll skip that. And so what's at stake here, right? So what? Who cares? Well, this is an image from a Western government, the United States, right? In 2012, of Democratic, I've taken some strikes at Donald Trump and those who might have supported him, so now I'll go the other way, of Democratic women in Congress. And this isn't actually a real picture. This is, women have been added into this image. And so Nancy Pelosi, who has been, going after Donald Trump since day one about him and not telling the truth in her eyes, actually defended this in 2012, saying, well, we need to be inclusive and we need to have all women pictured. If they're going to be part of this is a historic moment. This justification for having a particular image taken by the government and sent out. And this isn't surprising. But for any of us who know anything about governments and politics or business, I mean, who would ever expect their government to actually tell us the truth about many things? And there are certainly governments out there that do worse than this in terms of doctoring images or making up facts or stories, right? But this in particular, was trying to be normalized as something that's okay because it's inclusive. I mean, I remember when I was a reporter on Capitol Hill and there was some sort of event outside the U.S. Capitol as some sort of kind of weird commemoration for 9/11, where we'd all had to get together and talk about it or something. And this was a couple of years afterwards. And so I was standing in the press pool, and in front of me were all of the George Bush White House staff. And Time Magazine wanted to take a photograph of this Capitol, but everybody paused the event until people could get up into the rotunda and up onto the balconies to make the image better. And so this is Time Magazine that stops an entire, had encouraged the administration, and certainly they wanted that too because it would look better, stopping something to change the photo in the magazine, right? And so you may not say, well, that doesn't seem like a really big deal, but it kind of is, right? Then we shouldn't be saying that journalism, even magazine journalism, which in Time Magazine is supposed to be kind of that pinnacle of journalism in some ways. Then we shouldn't be talking about journalism as being something that is really about the facts, if it's also about the optics. And so it was one of those moments where I'd been doing journalism for long enough, but I was just kind of like, really? Like, what are we even doing here? Like, why are we covering this? What's this about? So on and so forth. Here's another concern. This on the left-hand side, you can see a television reporter in the foreground, standing up in a gray suit holding a microphone, and across from him directly is a young woman who's an intern for the White House, for the press office. And so you have Jim Acosta here, who had a very tense relationship with Donald Trump at the time, and I think always, and probably always will. And on the left-hand side, Donald Trump was telling him to, is a scene where Donald Trump is saying, "Stop talking. You're fake news. I don't want to hear from you anymore. You're done." Right now, this is after also, Donald Trump stopped daily briefings with the press and also kicked out journalists and took away John Acosta at some point his White House credentials. But on the left-hand side, you can see maybe how John Acosta's hand is out here in front of the microphone. And on the right-hand side, you see where it appears that he's striking the intern's arm. On the left-hand side, this is from C-SPAN, which is a government sponsored and run, it's still autonomous in many ways, news organization, showing you the actual pool video from that press conference. And on the right-hand side, a video that was doctored by the White House and released by Sarah Huckabee Sanders, who was the press secretary at the time. And so this was actually coming from the White House, doctored images. Now you'd imagine maybe that this would happen in some sort of about a military maneuver that the president's trying to hide, or that there was some sort of scandal that they were trying to get away with. But this is a press conference, right? And this is a way to delegitimize mainstream media, which honestly, in probably half of the eyes of the people in the United States, actually it doesn't have as much legitimacy as the left would like to think they do. But this is a concern. Now, what is a journalist supposed to do with this, right? And more than that, what about the people who see this and don't know that it's doctored? And so that's really part of some of the concern here. So here's another quiz. This is another question. Was that really true? I mean, I should have had like a really cool kind of like theme music that goes along. Is that really true? Trump team holds news conference outside drab landscaping firm next to adult bookstore. Is this true, or was this fake news? Yeah, if you're joining us tonight, you probably do know that there's a likelihood that this is true. Yes, that's absolutely true, right? And here they are. So the Trump White House had wanted to well, the landscaping company. Now I'm seeing your chats. They thought they had booked the Four Seasons hotel after the election, but in fact they had accidentally, apparently, we think, got this landscaping firm, which the landscaping firm actually has put together their own t-shirts. So you can now buy your own landscaping t-shirt to commemorate the day that they had a press conference at a landscaping firm. So this is sort of the thing where it's like, well, this is kind of strange. I don't even know if I should believe it or not, right? This is going back to, are all facts believable? Again, this is kind of a lighthearted one, but it gets to be much more complicated when it comes to things like the pandemic that we're still experiencing, that a lot of people have experienced much more firsthand than others. During the conversation about fake news, alternative facts, mis and disinformation, the idea of post-truth emerged, and we seem to kind of have moved away from that conversation in scholarship, and I'm still trying to figure out why. I think it's because we're getting too close to the reality that journalism, I don't want to say is fake, but it certainly is constructed. And it's going back to Gay Tuckman and early sociologists who talked about the construction of news, that a lot of our work is based on today. And so I think we might have been getting a little bit, we might have started to be pulling this apart and understanding that C. Wright Mills might have been right about the power elite, and that Noam Chomsky might be knowing what he's talking about, and that Henry Giroux might be right, and Zizek might. I mean, these people might actually have some credibility in what other people might think of as conspiracy theory, but what some of us think of as collusion between power houses within how societies operate, where journalism is part of that. And so the question is, have we moved beyond truth? Have we moved into post-truth? And I think one of the things that I wrote tried to touch upon that. I mean, when I did an edited book on the Trump presidency that came out in 2018, and then in paperback in 2019, which is what this is from. And the fake news conversation that was going on between some US and UK newspapers at the time and websites wasn't necessarily about fake news being anything other than a chance for them to reinforce their legitimacy as the arbiters of what's true, and that it was creating some sort of binary of truth and falsehood. And so I write here that, and sorry for reading all the text, but journalism and post-truth, I say, is not about complicating the notion of truth, but simplifying it, right? Truth becomes judged based on evidence, the believability of the evidence, and the source of the evidence. But here's the issue that I have with that, and this idea of journalistic evidence, is that journalists like things that are quantifiable and quantitative, right? Things that can be counted. But as we know, there are a lot of issues with statistics, a lot of issues with that sort of binaries of ones and zeros and yeses and nos. And so if I, for instance, were to take two neighborhoods and I were to say, there are a lot more police officers in this neighborhood above than the one below, which one's more violent, right? Which neighborhood has more crime? Well, probably the one above, not because of many more reasons other than there are more police to have contacts with people in cases and moments. So they're inputting more data. So if I go back to where I lived in Miami on the beach, on Collins Avenue, there was probably a lot more cocaine going on there than we'd like to know, and a lot of illicit behavior. But police weren't roaming up and down the beach, weren't roaming up and down Miami Beach and other places. They were in what some might describe as the hood, right? They were in Black neighborhoods, or they were in darker skinned Latino neighborhoods, quote unquote, fighting crime. And so there were police having much more contact hours and having data to input, that they were using their own biases of issues of gender and race and class and whatnot, and the description of the account that they were capturing in some form of data. So then maybe on the white part, or the lighter skinned Latino neighborhoods. I mean, when I lived in Iowa City, where I did in Iowa, where I did my PhD at University of Iowa, my wife at the time and I lived in the historic area, right? And we bought this little house and lived in this historic area. And I did my dissertation actually on a Black neighborhood of folk who were moving into this largely white area of the state, coming from Chicago, as the Robert Taylor homes and other housing projects were being dismantled and people were dispersing. And they would use the interstate system to just move easily into this other area. And it was very clear to me that when she and I were to have an argument or speak very loudly in our house, people walking by would say, "Oh yeah, she's a law student, he's a PhD student. They're just having a really great argument." But if there's any sort of loudness in that other neighborhood, right, then that's a domestic. Or if there are two or three people standing on our street corner, right, and they tend to be white in that particular neighborhood, and we know what that is, police or anybody are probably going to look by and say, "Oh, those are neighbors talking to each other." Whereas we have data that show, two or three, or at least two Black people standing on a corner in that city at that time constituted loitering and constituted some banishable sort of behavior, and undesirableness was created surrounding that population. So what I write here is that this post-truth conversation of have we just moved into a place that's about interpretation, some postmodern sort of idea that it's all just about the subjectivity? And I say that there's far too much room for interpretation of this evidence and the believability of the evidence and the source material that influences that evidence than a binary of truth and falsehood can represent. So this is a really great article in Journalism, and I think it's in the references, but I really think it was in Journalism and Mass Communication Educator. I think I actually edited that special issue. I can't remember anymore. But this is a really great piece where they're writing about a post-truth that says it reinforces the privileged and entitled positions of journalism educators, because that's what the special issue was about apparently, and curtails their responsibility as arbiters of professional practice and routine. In other words, there are communities that have justifiably not believed journalism or the facts that come from journalism, particularly if they're coming from a marginalized community or identity. And so, the post-truth conversation, as well as these other issues of fake news, seems to be, at least to Tishner and Ben, and I think a little bit to me, a bit of a privileged conversation whereas we, who, the three of us anyway that I'm talking about here, are coming from a position where we are usually believed if we were to talk to journalists, or we would believe what journalists have to say. We probably are coming from backgrounds where we haven't been questioned. So they talk about the multiplicity of truth, citing Fraser, who says the parallel discursive arenas, where members of subordinated subject groups invent and circulate counter discourses. Is this alternative facts? Or is this counter discourses, right? Which in turn permit them to formulate oppositional interpretations of their identities, interests, and needs. And I think that that's a part that we really don't get to talk to a lot. Now, when we're talking about this in a current contemporary today sort of thing, at least in the United States, it's about the right versus the left. It's still not talking about what Tishner and Ben and maybe Fraser and others want us to talk about, which is about race, class, LGBT, other positions that have been subjugated and remain, as forces for resistance. I think, particularly to how journalists talk about them. Well, anyway, so I think that these are some of the issues. I could probably go on about this for for too long, and I apologize, but I think that there are lots of power dynamics that the post-truth thing conversation actually hides. So here's some of the non-tech things that we can do, and I know I've been going for about 50 minutes, so I'll speed through this. But if we don't want to deal with the tech stuff that we'll look at quickly here in a second, there are some non-tech things we can do, right? Be worried about statistics. There are a couple of great books out there. They're quite old at this point, maybe, but how statistics lie and how maps lie. I think they're both by Mortimer, but certainly there's some interesting things about statistics. So in 1912, a Yale economist said, quote, "Stocks have reached what looks like a permanent high plateau." And the next week, the Great Depression happened when the stock market crashed. We should consider the prestige of the source. We really need to hear from the most prestigious individuals, and do they even know what the heck they're talking about sometimes. In 1967, a Harvard sociologist said, by the end of the century, quote, "If anything remains more or less unchanged, it will be the role of the women." Enter feminism, right? At least at a normative way. We can debate other interpretations of feminism later, but be skeptical of optimism. One prominent CEO in 1955 predicted, quote, "Nuclear-powered vacuum cleaners would become popular." Not yet. Pessimistic predictions should be viewed pessimistically. A British scientist in 1838 said, "Men might as well project a voyage to the moon as attempt to employ steam navigation against a stormy North Atlantic Ocean." I wonder what that person's vested interest in society or the economy was at that point. And this is coming from a fascinating book that Christopher Cerf and Victor Navasky, who was the dean of the Columbia Journalism Review for a long time, write about In the Experts Speak, which simply is a few hundred pages of this sort of stuff of things people have gotten wrong. Well, then there's me. I'm often an expert, quote unquote, if I may say so, on international TV. And maybe they should take some of the things that I've said, like Trump's going to win the presidential election, and put that into Victor's book. I should send that clip to him if he's doing a next edition. How and why do we select the experts that we select as journalists and who we listen to as viewers? I mean, it's been fascinating. I've done about 150 of these interviews since 2018. And sometimes they go from France to Iran to Russia to Australia, to CNN, to Sky News. And so it's fascinating to watch the different questions that are coming from different political and geographic positions. But there's also a reason why they asked me to come on TV. One, I am available, right? It means maybe I'm not that important, actually. Number two, I'm a white man. And number three, I'm at a British university, right? And so there are reasons why then I get to say some of the things that I get to say, even if I get them wrong, because I'm still seen as a legitimate expert. But as Navatsky and Cerf actually show us, we're wrong most of the time. And so smelling out kind of the BS part of things and issues of truth, I think is not so much socio-political as we're kind of led to believe that, or that it's a normative political sort of thing, but I think it's ideological, right? What we believe to be true. And I talk, I borrow from Thompson the meaning in the service of power as a definition for ideology, not just a belief system or not just something that's a subjectivity, but a commonsensical sort of approach, again, borrowing from Gramsci, that talks about explanations for the everyday or the instance or the issue that reinforces a cultural dominant position. And I think another thing we could do is to use some technology, despite the problems that we have with technology and its own roots in the power structure. There might be some ways for us to be a bit subversive with that. So I think this might be our last quiz before we talk about some of the stuff, some of the tech stuff. Was this really true? Now here's where my music would come in again. Buckingham Palace from BBC News says that the Queen Elizabeth II has died. This was in 2016. Okay, well, we probably know that that's not true. But how? Yeah, thanks, Nadine. Yeah, we may know that that's not true. But here's where some of this gets kind of tricky from a surfacey sort of thing. If you look in the top left-hand corner here, it says BBC News UK, BBC News in the parentheses UK. And then if you look at the actual handle, BBC News UK right? So this is, again, from 2016, and this is from that Globe and Mail quiz. But it says that the BBC News is at BBC News as its Twitter handle, not BBC News UKI. And so sometimes people are working too quickly. Sometimes people, again, want to believe things, and that might be I got the scoop. I know what's going on. I'm going to go downstairs and tell everybody that the Queen is dead. And it's sometimes it's just not being careful. So it's not, now we're not necessarily worrying about the intentionality. We're worrying about even not critical thinking skills, but who has the disposable time and energy and resources to actually kind of sit back and think about these things, right? I mean, if you're raising two kids, or if you're working two jobs, or if you're caring for somebody else and you're running across these things on your phone, it's believable that that the Queen could be dead, right? And so there are some inequalities, I think, that we also need to think about in terms of where the onus is. Is the onus on the corporations to police this? Is the onus on the individuals? Is the onus on people with more disposable time to help with this? But that's one of the other problems. So we're going to go into a couple websites here in a second, but I did want to kind of do a shameless plug for a podcast that you can listen to on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. I don't get paid for this. This is something I'm doing as an editor at Journalism Practice, where we put together conversations like this a couple times a month. And it just might be something if you're interested in journalism and maybe some of these more sociological, but also some tech conversations about journalism, you might want to turn there. So I'm going to, again, hopefully not break the system by stop sharing here, but I want to take us to the lovely internet just for a couple minutes, where I can show you just a couple examples of things that we can do from home to question what we're seeing online. So the first thing, and apologies if some of this is rudimentary to anyone, but this is basically Google image search. And one thing we can do is we can search an image. So what I'm going to do is upload an image using my screen here. Now you can see everything that I'm working on. Actually, I'm trying to work on it, but nothing ever seems to get done. Let me see if I can drop this image. Can I do that? If we can drag and drop the image. Okay. So what I just did is I took the image of the women outside the U.S. Capitol, and I put it into to Google, right? And so what it's showing me are a bunch of different things, right? It's showing me information about the U.S. Capitol. It's showing me other versions of this by size, but it might also start to show me discussions about the image itself. And so I'm showing you this because I think that it's interesting how much information we can get from a visual, not just from the semiotics and an analysis of the actual visual, right? Or talking to the people who produced it, but just from the data that the image is, right? And so somebody spending their time here could go through and look at all these different versions, right? And slowly start to come across where there might be some missing people, right? Or where there might be some added people. So here, if I were to go here, now I'm starting to see that people are questioning the image, right? They're saying, oh, this doesn't look right. There looks like there's some people who are missing or who have been added, right? And this is just a way that if you're looking at an image and you're like, is that a real image? Or where did this come from? Or who did it? Even at just the most basic kind of Google image search can help us understand. I mean, here you can get onto I don't even know what WikiWand is, so should I even believe this? But about photo manipulation, so you could start to question what you're seeing. The other thing is also this. Let's see if I can take that. You can just try this with other images. So now I just dragged I dropped in the Queen is Dead image, right? To see again what is in there. And this image of the tweet itself, right, is coming up on Mashable as being connecting to the BBC fake Twitter story. So you can see what's out there. Let's try let's try another one here because I want to see if this actually comes up. Okay, so here's a really fun little story. Now, I did my undergrad at University of Wisconsin-Madison, and I love the University of Wisconsin. I love it, love it, love it. Love their journalism school. But I was very, very disappointed one time, along with lots of other people, because if I took this image that's right here, which I don't know if you can really see. Let me see if I can make it bigger here. Okay, so I know it's getting pixelated, but here's an image, and in the foreground you see what appear to be two light-skinned or white women. Maybe this is a man in a baseball cap. They're wearing red. They look like they're at a football game, and then the top left-hand corner is what appears to be a black or African-American man. Oops. Now, if you looked at, if you look at this, you'll see, oh yeah, this image actually exists. But when you go further down, you get to this image, and you see, that image was part of it takes a while sometimes. It was a part of what we would probably call here what do we call them, a prospectus or something, like a document that shows like what the university is about, and this is for undergraduates to know what courses they can take and how to go about becoming a student and or all that sort of stuff, right? So this was put out by the university. Now you could say, okay, well, that's interesting. But then I go here, and now I see an image where there isn't our gentleman behind her arm. And you start to understand that this was actually a doctored image by the University of Wisconsin, where they took a picture of this gentleman who was actually someone who had never gone to a football game, an American football game at the University of Wisconsin. He'd never even gone there. Now, there's some racial elements here that goes back to some issues of myth and archetype and racist depictions that Black men play football or basketball. And therefore, why wouldn't he have been at a football game, right? I mean, it would make sense. But actually, this image of him was taken from Bascom Hill, which is kind of the storied hill in the middle of campus, which is academic and people suntan, but they also study. And so he was there studying, right? And he was there. He would have to go to that hill and study. And so there's some irony there in terms of a person who'd never been to a football game was taken for us to look diverse, right? For us to somehow, if we plop a Black person into an image, therefore, this is, we're a place you want to be, and that's a place that's inclusive. Now, the way that this image was picked out wasn't through technology, it was through human agency. It was a student who had worked at University of Wisconsin in like a photo lab or working with images. And a couple of things kind of recognized that this didn't look right. Because she either had known about one or the other image, but also, and you can see where the light is. This was probably taken, the main image was probably taken on an overcast day where the light is diffused equally over space. Whereas this image with our gentleman here was taken on a sunny day where there probably wasn't much clouds and there was a harsher light. And the light shining off of his forehead. And it's also coming from a direction where there wouldn't be a sun. I mean, you'd be looking at this. And so the university, I remember, actually went around all over the place and picked these up and destroyed them as fast as possible. But there's some fun, I mean, it's a very sad and serious thing, but there's some fun things you can learn about the world. So here's another example of something you can use. This is using YouTube. So I'm going to go into my channel. Now you can see the things I watch on YouTube. Fun little kid stuff. And I'm going to take a promo video that I did for a previous talk. And I'm going to mute it really fast. I'm going to see if I copy that URL and I put it into YouTube Data Finder. Let's see what happens. So it will find here that I was doing a promo for a Festival of Social Science talk, right? And it's pulling apart different aspects of the video that I created, right? So it's going into upload time in the day and any content or text that I put with it or a person who uploaded it. This doesn't happen and work with all videos, but this one it certainly does. Now, if I clicked on this reverse image search, you would see that my image is here, right? That I'm superimposed on top of this using a green screen, right? But that I actually took this photo from something else, right? So this isn't actually my photo and it's not sourced or cited. It's in the video, but now you can start to go back and say, well, where did that image come from, right? And so it's starting to take even a video such as YouTube as a way to go deeper into the past of that image and to take it apart. Now that may not get to if it's true or false, right? It's not getting to if it's mis or disinformation, maybe, unless there's content that you're gathering in those searches, but it certainly is starting to demystify, I think, media artifacts, right, as being something that is natural or that was produced solely for one purpose or intent, right? Now, because this PDF I hope will be sent out to you that has all of the stuff and more on it, I won't spend a lot more time on here, but this is Hoaxy. This is a really fascinating and complicated website where you can search Twitter or articles where you can start to visualize the spread of the claims and the spread of the connections and networks between different artifacts, right? And this is for a lot of kind of social people who like data science and whatnot, and it kind of gets my computer to overheat a little bit. So I'm going to just put in Donald Trump here into Twitter to see where did that come from? Twitter. There we go, and see what we can find in terms of what people are saying and who's saying what, tweeting certainly about Donald Trump out there in a second. So it takes a second because it's building really fascinating data visualization here that I hope you can see. So I'm not going to go through all of this because it is quite complicated, but these little nodes over here on the right-hand side of this chart where you see things moving around is tracking who's saying what and showing who's tweeting to who. And you can start to click on particular aspects here, right? So it's measuring the degree to which something might be a bot, right? May not be a real person's account. And it's going through and looking at who's mentioned this person, what tweets they've done. So if I click here, I can see what tweets that this account has been putting out, right? So how that declarations without evidence working out for you, President-elect Biden's approval rating, blah, 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 right? But if I let's see, how do I get back to that? So if I go back here and I go to another node, I can see, hi, buddy. Hi. So I can see more about who these people are, who's tweeting to whom again. So long story short, this is something that you can play with. You want a hug? Okay, 1 second, everybody. You're more important. Okay, go with Mama. Okay, thank you. I love you. Okay, Knuckles. Okay, and clap. Okay, bye. And so I will never apologize for my child. And so this is just something for you to kind of play with a little bit, to get a little bit deeper into social networks and nodes online. And so with that, I hope I didn't bore anybody with this last part, but I think that it's kind of cool to look and see what's out there that you all can play with. And with that, I will rest my voice. Alice.
Thank you so much. That was a really, really fascinating talk. And it was also nice to have your visitor come through towards the end. That was excellent. I'm really, really excited by particularly things like Hoaxy and the data finder that you told us all about. That's fantastic. And I will obviously, when I email everyone, to let them know that the playlist, that the video is uploaded to the playlist, depending on how I can wrangle GDPR and things, I will either give the link to your website and folks can contact you, or I will try and somehow attach the document. So leave that one with me. But I think we have time for about 15, 20 minutes left if folks have questions that they want to put in the chat. And we've got some coming straight in. Okay, so we can kick things off. Now that levels of trust have plummeted, is there any way back for the news media?
Well, I think that there are two ways to answer that. The first one is kind of the grouchy answer, which isn't directed at anybody for any reason, but is that I don't know that we've been able to figure out what the problems are. I don't think we've agreed to the problems that need to be solved. I mean, and the reason that kind of response comes out is, for the longest time, at least as long as I've been doing this, again, since I was 16 and I'm 40, is hearing people wanting to diversify newsrooms. And particularly in a US context, that's meant, we need to bring more African Americans into the newsroom, we need more women in the newsroom, and we need maybe Hispanic or Latino or Spanish speaking folk in the newsroom. I'm not saying that it should stop there, but I'm saying that that's what a lot of the conventional conversation has been about. And we've never seen it. We've never seen actual movements. It's the same sort of kind of crud that we get from people who say we need more diverse academics, right? And then they come out and say, well, we can't find anybody to fill these positions. We can't find any Black folk who want to teach, which is just a bunch of bull hockey, right? And so I'm not trusting in the solutions that have been presented so far, I think, by industry and by popular scholars, because I don't know that they're quite radical enough. We haven't necessarily seen an interest by corporate media to pay what it pays for someone who's non-white, or who might be non-binary, or who might not be the status quo of what we've wanted and had in newsrooms for a long time. I mean, quite frankly, my friends who are Black or Latino in the United States, who are practitioners and then go into academics, they're very expensive. There aren't very many of them for lots of reasons. And so we have to pay what we have to pay. And I think a lot of people don't want to do that. Now that's my curmudgeon answer. But my other answer can be, I sure as heck hope so. I mean, I think if we can start to see, one trend that we're seeing because of COVID and because of capitalism, right, is newsrooms shutting down, not news organizations, hopefully, but actual newsrooms, and people working more from home. If we can actually get people to work from neighborhoods, and I know, I think some magazines and lots of journalists have tried to parachute in for long periods, in Detroit, for instance, to write about Black lives and whatnot from a very kind of probably misleading sort of position. But if we can get people to go out into communities and report from communities and not have to go into, again, those centers of information that I described, that we all are familiar with, newsrooms next to courthouses, for instance, right? Then maybe. But we also have to recognize, at least in the US, that most of the journalists who are working journalists aren't living in those different neighborhoods. They're covering inner cities, living in the suburbs, right? And Janich and others have really written some interesting things about, one of his papers, location, right? Is how inner city news is repackaged for suburban audiences. So Black news is repurposed for white audiences. And so I'd like to have some optimistic pessimism here. But I think the changes that I would like to see are a little bit more radical than the industry is willing to do.
Thank you. I think lots of thoughts there. And we've got some great comments coming in, just thanking you, saying it was a great talk. Where are we? We have some questions. As more shared info is encrypted, is tracking hoaxes doomed?
Well, I think that's a really interesting question. I don't know how to answer that. I mean, we've seen a lot of people working within WhatsApp. I think there's some ethical dilemmas there of scholars working within WhatsApp groups or Facebook groups and not necessarily telling people that they're there. But I think if we were to use WhatsApp and we were to use other forms of encryption, and certainly journalists are using encryption for tips and whatnot. I think that's going to bring a new challenge into the believability of information, and that's where we're going to be relying, I think, a lot more on the supplementary coverage, right? I mean, these hoaxes and these moments of fake news or these moments of mis or disinformation are just, they may be important and large at the moment, but they're just kind of like dots along a line, a stream of lots of things going on in the news and in journalism. And so I think that, it's kind of the context around these moments that's the everyday journalism that needs to change a bit. I think journalism needs to be a little bit more robust. It needs to be a little bit more transparent. It needs to be a little bit more conceptualized, right? And maybe that means more linking and whatnot, so that when these moments come through and we may or may not be able to trace or track where the information is coming from, we've actually increased our ability to be critical of things. I mean, I think there was one moment when Donald Trump first went into the White House and a journalist came out and said that he'd removed a statue of, now here I go, maybe giving, maybe not fake news, but inaccurate news, a statue of Martin Luther King or something like that. And everybody wanted to believe that actually had happened. Maybe it did or maybe it didn't. But, journalists were coming out and saying, he's a racist guy. He's removed something from the Oval Office or from the White House. And people believed it, right? Because they kind of wanted to believe that he was a bad guy. Maybe he was. But I think that it's that ideological base that all of the news surrounding or in between these moments of contestation, I think that's really where we need to do some work so that when those moments arise, we're a little bit more prepared from. I don't know if that answered the question, but.
Yeah, I think it did a great job of that. We have one question here. I didn't understand the part about post-truth, if that was a simplification of truth, binary or not.
Yeah, so a lot of people talked about at the time, post-truth as a way to complicate what was going on at the time. And so trying to put fake news, alternative facts, mis and disinformation into some sort of context and saying that we've moved beyond facts and we've moved into interpretation of facts. And my argument is counter to what other scholars talking about post-truth in journalism, I think we're trying to say. They were saying that post-truth was talking about post-truth was a moment to question the validity of facts, right? And the subjectivities behind people's interpretations of those facts. And for me, I would like to argue that the post-truth conversation actually contributed to the idea that there is a truth and a falsehood. I mean, even its own title says post-truth, right? And that indicates that there is such a thing as truth. And I'm not trying to go into a metaphysical sort of thing, right? But it reinforced a binary of true and falsehood, and in so doing said, we the journalists know the difference between the truth and the falsehood. And I think that post-truth part was to elevate some sort of feelings of authority from journalists without actually saying, well, journalism's rooted in a lot of cases, and Edelman and others write about this, in white supremacy, and is rooted in class-based politics, and is rooted in capitalistic ventures. So for instance, if you open up USA Today or Wall Street Journal, and you might see today something called Money, a section called Money. It used to be called Business, right, where that talked about opening and closing of businesses, and now it's talking about finance and personal finance and stuff. What if it was called Work, or what if it was called Labor? And I'm not trying to go into some sort of Marxist argument, although it probably could be interpreted as one. But that kind of coverage would be different from the position of the worker, right? What it's like to work and what it's like to labor versus what it's like to invest money, right? And so anyway, I think that's what I was trying to say with post-truth is for some, it was trying to complicate interpretations of what was happening at the time with fake news. And for me, it was actually reinforcing a binary of a truth and a falsehood, and saying that journalists were the people who know the difference.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Okay. We have a longish one here. So, misinformation during a global pandemic such as COVID has the ability to undermine local, national, and international responses to keeping people safe. What steps and precautions do you think need to be made by local governments, such as councils, in order to increase the resilience of social structures and society as a whole to misinformation, which works to undermine these structures?
So there were, there was an effort by Parliament to bring in 190 academics who filled out these surveys about what they should do different, or how they should approach the pandemic different. And we were then called advisors or something like that. Well, I don't know how much advisors we really were, but one of the things I kept trying to say was, I think we should add to this issue of mis and disinformation the idea of incomplete information, or even maybe we could be a little bit more provocative and call it uncommunication, or something that actually creates a disincentive for people to question information. So if we were to go to lockdown rules, for instance, right? I mean, bloody hell, people couldn't see. I mean, the government couldn't even seem to get it right, and the spokespeople couldn't even seem to get it right hour by hour about from April all the way until 2 weeks ago. I think that there's danger certainly in mis and disinformation, but I think there's a lot different, or I don't want to say more, but very specific danger in releasing incomplete information, right? So, well, we know this today, we'll tell you more tomorrow. And it's just like, that is creating two things: mass confusion, right, and uncertainty. But in those moments of mass confusion and uncertainty, it's opening up these neurons that need to be filled, right? And just like a dependency on chemicals or drugs, for instance, right? Cocaine relies on something like these, bringing these neurons and the chemicals together inside the brain. Communication does the same thing too, right? People want to fill their uncertainty. They don't want to have that. They want to know or think they know what's going on. And so I think my concern is really that there are intentional, just like there's intentionalities between the mis and disinformation and Wordle and others sort of topographies of mis and disinformation. Certainly there's intentionality within incomplete information, right? And I think that is one of my main concerns, if I were to look locally anyway, about how Britain and the government has dealt with lockdowns, COVID. I mean, this whole thing has been a mess in terms of the clarity of the communication. I don't know if that addressed it, but that's kind of how I would think a danger that allows for mis and disinformation to prosper.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, kind of ties in with the narrative that's coming out about kind of agnotology and the deliberate muddying of the waters, I suppose. So and related to that, actually, we've got a question here. Very interesting talk, thanks. I'm wondering if you know much about research into the role of confirmation bias. For instance, do we perhaps have a reflexive skepticism to outlets on the other side, but a tendency to believe our own at face value?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, and I think a lot of scholars are doing a good job looking at right-wing media, trying to specifically, I think some of those scholars might also be trying to demonize right-wing media. Let me just put that out there to be clear, which I think is dangerous and also. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that goes to some of those more. You're saying a much more articulate manner than I did on my slides, where I said, some things, you just want to believe, or some things you just, can't believe, or you don't want to believe happening. And I think that very much goes to our biases and what we used to call filter bubbles. I'm not really sure if we call them that anymore. And I think there's still a lot of debate about that. But, and I think that's where the scholarship into WhatsApp groups, for instance, just as an example of this, is really, really fascinating. And also Facebook groups. I think that, particularly the private ones where you have to be entered into. I mean, the one that I watch from Lancaster Past and Present, and holy cow, is there a research project there related to the pandemic, for instance, and discussions about what we believe. I mean, I think initially, if we were to stick with COVID for another second, and the racist, anti-Chinese sort of rhetoric, not sort of, but actual rhetoric that was coming out in January, February, March. If somebody on that Facebook group said, I saw 2 Chinese college students at the hospital, they must have COVID, and everybody was just like, oh my gosh, why are these students even here? And it just explodes into something. It's those underlying ideological things, I think, that are still race-based in some instances. But yes, I agree with your assessment. You said it much more articulate than I did.
Okay, I've got a question. Are the tools or websites, so I think we're thinking about things like YouTube Data Finder and Hoaxy, are those tools and websites available from other countries such as China or Russia?
That's a really good question. I didn't put it through my firewall checks, so I apologize. And I don't speak to whether they can be accessed through a VPN or not. If you wanted to get in touch with me, I could reach out to. I'll put my email address in here. That might help. I'm happy to reach out to my colleagues who know better which ones might go across the territorialization of. It's a very long email address for me. So if you wanted to be in touch, I can certainly try and look for the ones that might cross those borders. And I apologize for not considering that.
No, that's great and really helpful. Thank you. Okay, we have a really nice comment. Hi, Ted. I'm a journalist and academician from India. The country is flooded with political, medical, and religious fake news. I work as a fact checker on a large space of mass media, as well as a media literacy activist, to the local communities. That's how I fight fake news. I'm a political communication researcher on post-truth. Thank you, Ted, for the awesome talk. It's midnight here in India. I'm awake late night just to listen to your talk on fake news. Thank you.
Oh, that's nice. Thanks so much. I'm actually putting something in here of an organization I'm part of that we're trying to grow, Global Risk Journalism Hub, which is looking for partnerships from journalists and others across the world to focus on how journalists are specifically dealing with many of the topics that we're talking about, particularly in a data ecosystem. I don't know if our comments are still on because it is midnight, but here's a link for anybody who's interested in that. I'm happy to talk about that.
Thank you. And we have 2 more messages from the same participant saying that InVid is another wonderful tool to detect fake news, which can be added to a Chrome application. And relatedly, there is Google News Initiative program Fact Check Explorer, which is a search engine for fact check.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
That's okay. We have a couple more questions, and then we can probably wrap things up and let you rest your voice after a really great presentation.
I get paid by the taxpayer, so I'm for whatever you need. Yep, go ahead.
Fair enough. Do you have any sense of whether it's worse that people are believing falsehoods or that they're not believing facts?
Oh, that's hard. I don't know. Hi, buddy. Okay, are you going to bed now?
No.
Okay, I'll be with you in 2 minutes. Okay, you go play on your iPad. Now they know how bad of a parent I am. Go play on the iPad. Okay, bye, buddy. I love you. Okay, we'll see you later. So I don't know. I mean, it might actually be worse that people are believing falsehoods. Again, downstairs in my kitchen, having conversations about if COVID is real or not, just boggles my mind. I really don't know how to answer that. I think it's a good question, and it's kind of scary. I write in the Trump book that I did where Donald Trump had said something kind of I don't know what at the time we thought was maybe a little off the wall ish, and I was sitting with another family member in the States, and this person said, I can't believe, who was a Trump supporter, said, I can't believe he said that. And I thought, oh, breakthrough. Let's just have a conversation about that. And I said, well, what's even scarier is that whatever he said, people believe. And this person said, oh, it's not. I mean, I believe it. I just can't believe he said it. And I think for me, that was just kind of a moment of what a world we are in.
Yeah. I think the question about believing falsehoods or not believing facts is kind of an excellent exam question. And also it's kind of, it's a question for 2020.
We don't do exams here anymore, but yes, it could be an exam question.
Yeah. Okay, last couple of things we've got here. Most, quote, legit journalists believe they are objective, but of course no one is. So they present information in a non-emotional way. But as humans, we aren't entirely rational. We're emotional too. How do you tap into both rationality and emotion in order to reach people?
Yeah, so there are, and I'm happy to share this too. There are lots of journalism scholars right now who are continuing to move into issues of emotion and looking at the role of that, particularly in immersive media. So using virtual reality or 360-degree sound. Or the taking walks through a park and listening to the sounds, or trying to read the Brexit agreement in a whisper, right? That creates some sort of a physical, biological, chemical reaction as well. And so, there's a whole lecture on objectivity, right? And Walter Lippmann and the professionalization of journalism to try to address issues of there not being objectivity, but then moving into triangulation and verification, and then Fox News coming out and saying, well, we know that we're biased, so we're going to try and be, no, I didn't skip the Santa thing, Laura. Yes, Martine, I don't know if he believes in Santa or not, but it's, what's interesting about that question is it's hard to balance between if I need to be teaching him about Christmas and Jesus, or Santa, or the complications behind the word Christmas. So I am trying to avoid most of that for a while. So I saw the question. It's just one that's bothering me in my head. So I think that the emotion component is, actually a lot of people wanting to be more focused on emotion. I mean, just editing a podcast now where we're talking about somebody who was using virtual reality to measure the degree to which that type of journalism could, through emotion, have people come to understand what something like sexual harassment would be like for a person in a workplace. Right now, we can question the method and the rigor and the validity and all that of the study, but it is trying to get to the emotion. So journalists do balance that sort of idea of trying to be objective, but also functions of literary journalism and the way of telling a story. And, even, Joseph Campbell and the hero's journey of like starting with a problem, going out to solve it and returning to celebrate, right? I mean, these are about drama and conflict. So I think that is I don't like this term, but I think that's a bit of a schizophrenic sort of challenge that they have between, are we going to just do just the facts, ma'am, or are we going to try and draw people in? So I think that's also a marketplace sort of influence, I think.
Brilliant, thank you. I was actually saving the Santa question to finish up with.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, but it seems like we've got there, and I think we've sorted that out. That was the main question of the
night, was the only
one,
yeah.
We had one last question just come in between lots of comments saying how interesting this talk was.
That's great.
Can you speak about spin doctors like Roger Stone who engineer messages? We have political parties here in India with 1,000 Roger Stones and troll bots to spread fake news and hate news.
Yeah, who's not Roger Stone? I think could be a good question sometimes. I think that Roger Stone's a very interesting specific example, but I think I'm also concerned about the younger generations who don't necessarily know who some of these individuals are. They don't know the histories, but they are learning how to spin, right? And they're learning how to do some of the things that we're talking about, right? Like collaging evidence of things. I mean, my wife is much younger than I am, so has a very different relationship with social media than I do. And I just sit back sometimes in amazement of some of the things that, particularly her friends and whatnot are doing, trying to make arguments from, they're Colombian. So there's another completely different political environment. So if we were to look at like the peace negotiations in FARC, for instance, in Colombia, and I look at some political vantage points of even young folk in their 20s putting together some of these arguments, or if we're looking at Venezuela, or we're looking at Brazil, or we're looking at places where there's a lot of this political contestation, and I know you're talking about India and other places as well. These people don't even know who Roger Stone is. So what is it that is fueling, and where are they getting this, not just this technical skill set, but where are they learning spin? And quite frankly, not to sound too grouchy about this, but our history textbooks are just full of a load of baloney. If I were to look at, in the US, I thankfully haven't looked at a British history textbook yet. But in the US, just completely full of lies. So for instance, the idea that Rosa Parks, a Black woman who sat down on a bus to fight inequalities in busing system in the middle of the civil rights movement, that story is still presented as though she just one day decided she'd had enough and she wanted to sit down and protest. Well, no, she was a part of the NAACP, and she was recruited particularly for that moment of contestation, of conflict. She had done it before. Now, if we actually told people the story of Black power and folk coming together to rise and resist white supremacy, that would shake up society, at least in the US. So we go with a very whitewashed perspective. And maybe that's where the younger generations are learning how to spin, because they're learning it from us. They're learning it from the institutions that are raising them. The Rosa Parks story, is one about collective action, not just about individual agency, not to diminish her individual agency, but certainly it does diminish, in that story, not just Black radicalism, but Black legacy and the ability to collectively act, and stories that would put fear into a lot of white folk, I think, in the US. So I think, that's Roger Stone, yes, but also what are we doing, and what we approve for textbooks, what we approve in curricula, what we're doing. I think that's also a concern of mine.
Brilliant, thank you. I think we have covered
everything
everything needed covering. And I think perhaps one of the comments that we can kind of finish up with really is one of the participants saying that the thing to really stick with her is this idea that news is a social construct. And that's something to always remember, I think, isn't it? So a huge thank you to Ted for giving this brilliant talk, which hasn't just told us about stuff, but has given us resources going forward as well, which is fantastic. Thank you. And thank you for everyone for attending as well. As I say, the talk has been recorded and it will be popped up on the university seminar series playlist in the next week or so, festive period pending. And when it's up, I'll send an email to let everybody who registered know that it is up there. And I will try and either attach the document or send the link to your website, and we'll figure something out. This is our last talk of the year, so thank you so much. If you're interested in hearing what else we will be hosting, you can look out for a session in January, which will be related to an extent on social media use in China. And in February, we'll have a session on climate and gentrification. So very different, but hopefully of interest. So keep an eye out for those on the Eventbrite page if you are interested in coming along. And with that, really just another big thanks to Ted for a great talk. Have a great winter break, whatever anyone can do during 2020, and stay safe.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks a lot.